We're very sorry for the inconvenience that some of you may had to enter the building. The management here, they're trying to renovate the place, so it's a little bit complicated with the garage and so on. And unfortunately, our colleague, General Gray, who is the chairman, actually, of the Board of Regents of the Potomac Institute, and as many of you know, he was the 29th Commandant of the Marine Corps. He was on the way, and there is a delay, so I would have to begin without him, but obviously I would like to thank our colleagues at the Potomac Institute for their support, and some of the senior management are on travel, so they cannot participate with us. In fact, General Gray participated at our program in December that we had at the International Law Institute on the Balkans, some of the security issues of the Balkan at the time. And we like to continue with the dialogue, and today we have a unique opportunity to continue to focus on the Balkans. As I mentioned, it's a follow-up to our earlier events in December, and at that time we had the ambassador from Croatia and the ambassador of Greece and the ambassador in addition of Macedonia, and an academic who also had experience at the CIA and so on. So today we are going to focus attention on some of the past lessons and future outlook. First, let me introduce very briefly our panel. We distributed some of the bios so you can look at that. The first, I think, speaker is Ambassador Floreta Faber, right here to my left, not politically. I'm bipartisan on many of these issues, but she needs no really introduction from what I understand. She's the first woman ambassador to the U.S. from Albania, and she has very rich experience both diplomatically and in the business field. But it caught my eye that you also worked in Prague, the Czech Republic, and 2 days ago we had a very distinguished delegation here from the Czech Republic, from Charles University and the armed forces with NATO, and we discussed some common, I think, issues. So we'll come back to it. So we look forward to your contribution. And the next speaker to our left also is Ambassador Vlora Citaku, who is the ambassador from Kosovo to the U.S. And previously she had the opportunity to serve as Consul General of Kosovo in New York. And before that, she served as Minister of European Integration of the Republic of Kosovo, acting Minister of Foreign Affairs and Deputy Minister of Foreign Affairs, etc. So obviously she will contribute to our discussion from her perspective. Following her, we have Ambassador Stanislav Vidovic from the Embassy of Slovenia, who is going to speak on some of these issues as well. And he also had very rich background and experience serving in his country, of course, also academic university, and it's a very long list of accomplishments, so you can look at that. And in addition, we do have the ambassador for Montenegro, Kaluderovic, who is going to join us and also contribute to our discussion. Finally, as you see on the program, we have Richard Prosen, who is a member of the U.S. Department of State. We also have his bio, very rich accomplishments on the governmental level and as well as the military. And we have actually the honor to host him. I may know that one of the studies that we conducted jointly was on NATO. We published that book with the introduction by General Wesley Clark, and we continued the relationship. I'm mentioning this because obviously the role of NATO is very important, and we can make these publications available to you. Now, finally, our friend and colleague Don Wallace, who is the chairman of the International Law Institute, is a professor of law at Georgetown School of Law, and you have his bio as well. So we have a very distinguished panel. We also have a very distinguished, I think, audience from embassies, from government. We are trying to develop international cooperation in this field. So we are grateful that we can develop some discussion. Just one or two other words. I think it is really important at this point to remember the victims of terrorism and violence. Particularly, I want to mention the 9/11 victims. As you know, we, I think, had to deal with a terrible tragedy, not only from the U.S. perspective, but internationally. There were victims from 61 different countries, including, at that time, Yugoslavia. So every region, country was victimized by terrorism. I'm mentioning this because actually back 2 years later, Osama bin Laden declared war on the United States, and we're still dealing with that challenge, as well as the ISIS and other non-state groups. So our condolences, obviously, to those who survived and to the families and to the people of the countries affected. Now, just one additional word from the academic point of view. As I mentioned, we worked with many institutions academically, governmental agencies all over the world, in Europe, and I just was informed that a colleague of ours from Spain was actually, he passed away recently. He was a friend and colleague, Professor Velarde. I'm mentioning this because He was the most senior, I think, expert in Spain on WMD, was concerned with the proliferation issues and the trafficking in materials from different countries, including in the Balkans. He died. He was a distinguished professor there at the director of the Institute on Fusion in Madrid, and also a general and so on. We miss him, but we want to preserve his legacy and continue. I won't go into details in terms of our interest. When I say our interest, I'm talking about the academics in the Balkans that goes all the way back even to the Cold War. And I recall one of our graduate school course was in Dubrovnik all the way back to 1979, 1980, and so forth. And we continued our work in the post-Cold War as well, dealing with specific issues related to the Balkans, the separatism issue, and so on. So with that, we are continuing, obviously, our discussion, and I would like to proceed with our colleagues here to make a brief initial statements, and then we'll open it up for questions and answers. Ms. Ambassador, if you would like to come up here. Okay.
Thank you very much, Professor Alexander, dear colleagues and honorable guests. Thank you very much for organizing this forum. Probably it's a good time to talk here in Washington on the issues in the Balkans and EU and our cooperation between each other. It is always an impression when we speak with others that they believe the Balkans are much worse than they are actually. We come from a almost 30 years now history where countries came out of totalitarian regimes, and in the 90s it wasn't a time that we like to go back and as a good part of our history, countries were fighting each other, and today we are in a complete different relationship with each other, and we are all countries which have different aspirations. Relationship between the countries and societies have generally suffered through the years in lack of trust with each other, and even inside ourselves we have the lack of trusting our institutions, and we have come to realize that working together and peace and security and cooperation and Euro-Atlantic prospect and agenda is what countries would be looking forward. There are a number of issues which are in the region today which come internally and externally, and I would like to go through some of them and present our perspective of the development in the Balkans and our Euro-Atlantic perspectives. The rise of nationalism is probably one of the most prominent security threats today in the region, in the Western Balkans in the last year, and we have seen several episodes on issues in I would mention a train which came from Serbia to North Mitrovica in Kosovo with names written in many languages. Kosovo is Serbia. We had recently killed one of the Kosovo Serbian politicians, Ivanovic, who was killed in the middle of the day. We had last year in April a situation in Macedonia where people came inside the parliament threatening members of the parliament and trying not to let form the new government. And these are just a number of episodes that show the vulnerability of societies sometimes. There are moments where when we go back and believe that we continuously need a strong support and strong messages from EU and United States, and a strong cooperation and letting past those episodes and past our 90s history and work together in the future for peace and security. The second threat it's a number of issues, especially with our institutions. The weak rule of law, the weak democracies, and non-resilient societies, which all face in the daily basis. As you might be familiar, in Albania, Albanians' democratic institutions were characterized on a very highly dependent and influential judicial system, and we believe that focusing on improvement and a radical change of the judicial system is something that would give a chance to the country to bring back the trust of people in the rule of law and judicial institutions. For these reasons, we, in the last year, the Albanian government strongly work on changing of the complete infrastructure of the judicial system. We changed 1/3 of the constitution. We changed a big number of laws. We're going through a vetting process of judges and prosecutors. Over 800 of them will be under as part of this process, which started now in 2018. And we believe that this reform is needed for the Albanian people, is part of the EU requirement, is part of bettering the country as a NATO member. But first and foremost, it's part of the process we need internally in order to increase the stability, not in our countries, but also in the region. So basically, as I mentioned, two main threats coming internally from issues inside the countries, and also the nationalism that is increased lately in each of our countries. When it comes to external issues that has a strong effect is, I would mention especially violent extremism and its related aspects, the return of foreign terrorist fighters, and also the meddling of the third powers in the region. Violent extremism is related with a number of phenomenon, and even though we don't see an increase of the ideology and the effect of violent extremism, the new effect now in the region is the return foreign fighters and how they become part of the society. There are issues which are socially and legally in accepting them back, and in countries like Albania, for example, we have set a number of structures in order to ease their return. We have a national strategy on CVE since November 2015, an action plan from 2017 to 2019, which has a holistic approach on how to have a normal acceptance of those people, sometimes when they have to face legal issues, sometimes they have to face economic or social issues. And we have decided to open a center that we call CVE Center, on having a place where people have an education, a training, also talking especially with young people, so they don't get bothered from the ideology and effect from outside and from foreign fighters that return. And we hope that this also serve as a hub in the future in increasing cooperation between the countries. We also were under Albania was not part of the route of migration coming from south, but we gave our support together with EU, NATO, especially working with Greece and Turkey, in order to give support and effect for easing the process. In confronting those issues in the region, we believe that a long-term answer and solution for the situation in the country, especially, is the increase of cooperation between all the countries in Western Balkans. And it's not simply the government; it's strengthening the institutions and educating young people, working more on all the projects, on economic perspective projects, mobility of people from one country to another. And we also should look at all our EU perspective, individual as countries and jointly all together. As we are in different stages of EU membership, two countries, Montenegro and Serbia, has opened the negotiations. Albania, we hope to have a good support for opening the negotiations in 2018. We also believe that the countries should not also because we are all required to reach a certain stage of building our institutions and cooperation, but we believe we should be a strong part of the tables on talking with EU and not left aside, especially in a Euro-Atlantic cooperation. Last year we had, with the new government here in United States, we saw that messaging from United States was very positive in reaching the calm in the region, and the visit of Vice President Pence and meeting with all the leaders in the region was a very positive step towards working with our region. But in the moment where we see, when I mentioned third parties, you have all influences today from Russia, China, Turkey, everyone trying to see their sometimes political or economic or different influences. We believe that each of our countries who are strongly directed to our values and building democracy and democratic institutions, we believe that having stronger presence of the United States will make a positive effect. And when we see presence, meaning with all type of activity, politic, messaging, having more economic look at more economic interest also in the country. Another chapter we look all together is also the NATO open door policies, which we view this very gives a very positive effect in our country. Albania strongly supported membership of Montenegro, and we have been in the way also supporting membership of Macedonia. We believe strongly that NATO and Kosovo should have an institutionalized relationship, and the relationship with NATO is as a support on building our institutions, having better relationships in between the countries in the region. And as I mentioned also, we hope that the open door policy from Europe comes earlier than 2025, as we have started hearing some dates now. Every country has its own level of development on regard to EU membership and accession, but we believe that Europe and each of the countries should look at the Western Balkans, not simply some additional countries to EU, but also as an alliance which strongly give a positive effect economically, in security, in working all together in the future for Euro-Atlantic relationships. I believe I would stop here, and if you have questions, then I'm ready to answer. Thank you very much.
President.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Professor, ambassadors. It's an honor to be here. I want to also recognize the ambassador of Bosnia, the ambassador of Bangladesh, and our colleague from the Serbian embassy. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll be very brief because we not only share the same regions, we also share the same set of challenges and threats and opportunities. So to avoid the situation when we would repeat one another, I'll try to summarize my thoughts in very, very few minutes. First, I'll start with a cliche, not only because it's famous, but because cliches are true, mostly true. A very wise man said once that the Balkans produces history far more than it can consume. And it is true. I have witnessed more history in my lifetime than anyone ever should. To put it in a very funny way, I've had 5 passports. 5 different passports or travel documents since I was born. So that says a lot about the transformation of the region where I come from. While we all agree that the region has never been as peaceful as it has been in the last decade, we from the Balkans also know that progress in our part of the world is easily reversible. And that is especially true because most of the problems in the Balkans haven't been finally addressed, and there's a lot of unfinished business. Kosovo-Serbia relations is one of them. It is unfinished business. The accession of Macedonia and the name dispute with Greece is unfinished business. Bosnia is unfinished business. So it's basically a frozen conflict, a status quo that can no longer sustain itself. Now, the good news is there is good political will in all capitals to address the challenges in a peaceful manner. Nonetheless, the challenges are there, and they will not be able to be addressed or fixed without direct U.S. involvement. I dare say that most of the problems we face in our part of the world today are an outcome of lack of cohesive EU policy. There is no clear, concrete EU perspective for Kosovo because there are 5 EU member states that still have not recognized our independence. Bosnia is on a status quo for over a decade, because there is major EU disagreement and lack of clarity on what to do with Bosnia. Macedonia, well, I don't even want to start talking, because there's a name dispute with Greece, there's a dispute about language with Bulgaria, etc., etc., etc. And another lesson that the history has taught us in the Western Balkans is that without U.S. involvement, things can get pretty bad. Now, I am not particularly worried about external influences, although they are very present. Russia has tripled their diplomatic presence. They are buying media. They are buying NGOs. I mean, just a couple of days ago, they had a story about me that I had paid like $2 million to have a meeting with Ivanka Trump. Like, I want to know, where is the money? I mean, the fake news, the propaganda they're investing every day is being amplified and is creating problems. But Russia has lost. In our part of the world, Russia has lost. They can create chaos. They can create friction of war. They will try to disrupt, like they did in Montenegro. But they know they have lost. They don't have a strategic objective in our part of the world, unlike in Ukraine or Georgia or other eastern countries in our continent. In our part of the world, they know they've lost. But they want to make sure they are a disruptive force, just to poke US and EU in the eye and to remind them that they are there. Of course, they will continue to have a role in our part of the world as long as there is lack of clarity from Serbia on what do they want from their future. Because at the time of non-aligned movement in our part of the world has ended. As an EU candidate country, one must fully comply and align the foreign policy objectives with the ones of the European Union. So as long as Russia can use influence over Serbia to disrupt the region, they will continue to play a role. But ultimately, strategically, they have lost. Because there is one common denominator in our part of the world, and that is the desire to join the European Union. NATO is also very, very important, especially with Brexit and with lack of clarity on the roadmap ahead for the rest of us. NATO has an added value. We are particularly proud of our neighbor Montenegro, and I can say we are actually not proud. We're blessed to have Montenegro as a neighbor, because they have been a stabilizing force in the region. And can you imagine? They're sending their first soldiers as part of KFOR NATO troops in Kosovo. And I want to thank you, Ambassador, and your government for a very constructive role you're playing in the region. There are also other external forces that will try to use the momentum, the lack of EU clarity. But while EU needs to and I'm not trying to put pressure on my Slovenian colleague here, but while EU needs to reinvent itself also internally, we are ready as a region. I believe we are ready as a region to move on. We are all interdependent. Kosovo will never excel alone. We will be good only when all of our neighbors are good. And we will be a prosperous country only if the region is prosperous. That's why we support the European future en bloc for all of us. Thank you very much.
Good afternoon, everybody. There are actually two reasons why I shouldn't be here today. First one is that Slovenia is not a Western Balkans country. That is what we were trying to prove from 1991 when we actually became independent, and we were struggling not to be a part of the problem, but as a part of the solution of the problem. But years later, we actually realize that we are stuck to the Western Balkans because at least we are neighboring to the Western Balkans, even if we don't want to be a part of it. The second reason why I shouldn't speak now is because Vlora stolen my speech. She was actually saying many things which I want to say, but I will also try to add something from my views, but she actually mentioned most of the burning problems and most of the burning issues in the Western Balkans which have to be tackled. In the Western Balkans, nothing looks like it appears. We cannot agree on anything. Even when we have the same event, we cannot agree what we heard or what we actually are going to do. I will illustrate that with a small joke. God one day decided to call 3 leaders from the Western Balkans countries to tell them what he is going to do. It doesn't matter from which countries, just to illustrate the views of the leaders in the Western Balkans, how they can go apart. And the God said to all 3 of them, I am not satisfied with you, guys. You are doing very bad, so I will destroy you in 7 days. Please go to your nations and explain them that I decided to do that. So the first leader comes to his nation and he says, I have 2 bad news. First one is God really exists. We didn't believe that he exists, but he exists. And the second bad news is that he is going to destroy us in 7 days. The second leader came to his nation and he said, I have 1 good news and 1 bad news. Good news is that God exists. We always believed in him. And the bad news is that he is not satisfied with us and he's going to destroy us in 7 days. So the last leader came and he said, I have 2 good news. First one is that on my because I was insisting, God called me to him, so I have seen that he really exists.
He saw that he exists.
Yes.
God.
So the second good news is that I have persuaded him to postpone destruction of our country for 7 days. So you can see, this is illustration of how we are actually having the understanding of the same event in the Western Balkans. Western Balkans is not what you believe it is, because we also don't know what next day can bring. And this is of our concern. And what Vlora said, it's true. We are living in the Western Balkans, in the countries for which we do not know how some small events can evolve in few days. It's all bad news, whatever you can imagine. Something can happen and we could have once again explosion which we were facing in 1991. But this is the history. When I was a student and when I was finishing my diploma degree, I was writing about legitimacy of the Communist Party. That was the main concern of everybody. We are talking also about lessons learned. That was the main concern about of all the nations at the beginning of the 90s, at the end of the 80s. Legitimacy of the Communist Party and how we can reach a functioning Western-type democracy. And we were, at that time, of course, discovering many things against. Among this was also the question of the rule of law. And this is the question which was very burning at that time, but it is also very burning nowadays. The respect of rule of law, the respect of international law. This is one of the main issues which we have to face in the Western Balkans. I'm not here, I don't want here to talk about our relations with any of the countries surrounding us. But this is the question which we have to face, also Slovenia, but all the others. We are now facing the fact that nobody actually likes anymore Dayton Agreement. Is it that? But it is a part of international law. How we are approaching to the Dayton Agreement? How we are approaching to the questions of the borders between the countries? Are we respecting the obligations we took when we signed international agreements in the Western Balkans. We are expecting international obligations only if they suit to us, if we like them. If we don't like them, we don't respect them. That is the biggest problem, and this is the problem. The problem of the rule of law was addressed also in the last Western Balkan strategy of the EU, which is, I agree, not the best one. We are the member of the EU. It is a missed opportunity to send more clear signals to Western Balkans about their future. You know, if you don't mention in the strategy for the Western Balkans Turkey negotiating more than 35 years, then there is something seriously wrong. If you are having Kosovo, you know, as a almost non-existing country in this strategy and without clear perspective, it's also something which is, you know, more or less, I would say, political pamphlet which will not actually bring to life any of the foreseen policies. Maybe I'm a little bit pessimistic, but that's how I see this. It's not official Slovenian policy to understand each other. We are, of course, welcoming the strategy because it's a move further, but it's not, I would say, the best move we were hoping for. Another thing which I would like to say is that I'm very glad that in the last half a year, I came here in June last year, but in the last half a year I can see fresh wind in the United States policy towards the Western Balkans. I couldn't see it when I came here. I couldn't see it for last 8 years. The former administration of President Obama has forgotten the region. You can see that also in the sense that there were actually no high-level visits visits to the Western Balkans until the Vice President Pence came to Montenegro. Almost no high-level visits. So where was Western Balkans in the politics of the United States? And you played such an important role in the 90s and also at the beginning of this millennium. Without the intervention of the United States, things would be much worse and still going in the wrong way. So what we need now is, again, the clear, I would say, policy of United States towards Western Balkans. It should be a part of probably of wider strategy because as a big country you are probably looking to our region as something very small. I suppose that inside Free Seas Initiative this could happen. If this Free Seas Initiative will take account the whole Western Balkans, and it will also tackle the issue which is very important, and this is interconnectivity between north and south of eastern part of Europe, which we believe is very important because otherwise the Western Balkans will remain an appendix on the map of Europe. So I hope that this positive Western Balkans politics of United States will develop, and that you will have more guts than the EU had. Two things are important, and they were already mentioned today: the EU and NATO perspective for the Western Balkan countries. Slovenia became a member of the EU, of NATO. We are part of Schengen. We have Euro. We are in the all possible integrations. Why is, for instance, for us important to be a member of the EU? Not because we are now the part of the most, one of the most powerful integrations in the world, and not because of that we are actually having our economy growing and having really good results. It's important because the perspective of the becoming a member of the EU, becoming a member of NATO, becoming a member of Schengen, becoming a member of Eurozone is that you are going to have all the guarantees that your economy, your society will flourish. The problem of the Western Balkans country is that people do not see, in most of the Western Balkan countries, people do not see clear perspective about their own prosperity. There are no jobs. There are not very well paid. They are insecure. They are still fearing that the war can emerge again. They have corruptive governments. They can see the cooperation between criminal groups and terrorists. They can see the cooperation between criminal groups and governments. But being a member of the EU gives some guarantees that this, with all the regulation, can be stopped. One thing about Schengen, which is good, you don't have in the United States problems to cross borders between each state here. We had it in Europe. We still have with some countries that problem. But Schengen is not bringing all possibility that people and goods are traveling across without problem. Schengen is bringing also something which is very important. It brings a united cultural sphere. So Slovenians in Slovenia, in Austria, in Italy, in Hungary can feel the united cultural space. But also Italians can feel united cultural space because we have Italian minority in Slovenia, and this is this is one of the reasons why we have to finish the business in the Western Balkans and have all the Western Balkans countries in the EU and possibly also in the future in NATO, because this is the perspective when the borders are not going to be the problem anymore, and we are not going to think about the importance of the borders. And we are going to live in the, I would say, same cultural space with Croats or with Muslims or with, I don't know, Albanians, all the same, all in the same cultural space. Then we would not think about, things which might lead again to a new war. There are some initiatives also in the region which are going in that direction. One of them is also Brdo-Briuni process, which Slovenia is doing together with Croatia, which is political forum, which is very good, but without, I would say, a real economic background, financing the project, we can do nothing. But that is needed. Then the other one is a Berlin Plus process, which should support these ideas from Brdo-Briuni process with some money. But we are seeing now very weak German government, but also before the German government and especially German companies did not bring that what we were expecting for the region. Then there is a process which you guys from United States are leading. It's called Friends of Bosnia process, which should help Bosnia to go further with political processes. But this is a small one, so we are hoping for a bigger one, including investments from United States to the region, if they are going to be in the energy sector, but they can be also to the other sectors. But they are going to be important because we all hope that they are going to improve the life of the citizens. It's all about that. The membership in the EU is improving the life of the citizens, and the membership in NATO is improving the security of our people. That's important. That's why we were very glad when we seen Montenegro becoming part of it. That's why for us it's very important that we would make next step, that Macedonia would become a member of NATO. And that's why we would like to see also that we would have more understanding for internal processes for Bosnia and Herzegovina. So Bosnia and Herzegovina could also join MAP very soon. With Serbia, we'll see what will happen, but I'm not saying that Serbia will not be capable one day to think also about joining NATO. I'm sure that the perspective of all of us should be there, because alone in this, I would say, very strange international environment which is developing in the last few years, being alone is not a good thing. Russia was mentioned. I will not tackle Russia, but basically I agree with Vlora. I'm not so optimistic about the fact that Russia shouldn't have any serious goals to achieve in Western Balkans. They have. If they have some strategy it's not good for us. Whatever they're doing is not good for us. But there's another factor in the region, and that is China, which we are not mentioning today. China is also a very important player through One Road, One Belt, but also through 16+1 initiative. They have a lot of money, and this money is not for free. We have to be aware of that. If Russians are not having direct, I would say, access to the financial resources China does, and they might be very successful if you are not going to be more, I would say, cautious about it, and if you are not going to see more investments, not only from the European Union but also from the United States. One last remark: we were facing heavy migration flows just 2 years ago. Through Slovenia, 1 million people were going through. That is half of our population. We are fearing now that when the snow will melt down, and this will happen in a month or two, that we are going to have another flow through the Balkan route again, maybe through Bosnia and Herzegovina, maybe again through Serbia, we don't know it, maybe through Croatia by the sea. But we are very aware of that, and this might cause a dangerous problem. And we should not also forget all those people, more than 200 of them, who were fighting for Daesh, and they are back. They're living not only in Bosnia or in Croatia, they're living also in Slovenia, they're living in Serbia, in Macedonia, and so on. So, if I should conclude, am I optimistic? Am I the third guy from my story from the beginning? Did I persuade God, or can I persuade God to postpone the destruction of the Western Balkans for 7 days? I'm not sure about it. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
It's not an easy task to persuade the God, even when you are in position to meet him. Thank you very much. It is my pleasure to join you. Most of the thoughts that I had in my mind have already been expressed. So thank you very much to Vlora, Floreta, and Stanislav, and I'll really try to be as brief as possible. Whenever I say that, my previous experience from the UN reminds me of usual story there. When you want to say something about position of your country, usually that goes this way. Mr. Chairman, let me briefly explain position of my country regarding the topic that we are discussing today, and then endless stories. This is a very, very interesting topic for all of us. Ambassador of Slovenia said that there are 2 reasons why he would not most probably be here, but I'll tell you 2 reasons why you must be here. First one is both of them are in the title of this panel, and first one is past lessons. And I think we could have learned from you much more than we did. And the second one is future outlook. Just because you are a member of NATO and now in particular a member of the European Union, and we need you as a country and diplomats and friends that understand maybe the region of Western Balkans better than some others. So we have the title, Past Lessons, Balkan Security Challenges and Future Outlook. If we want to talk about past lessons, that would be really endless stories. If we want to talk about security challenges, so many of them. And if you want to talk about future outlook, variety of them. But I think that we can agree that all the lessons that we learned from, let's start from the dissolution of Yugoslavia. Every country in the Western Balkans has its own narrative. And we all have our most important historic date, which is sometimes difficult to be confirmed in reality, and I dare to say that there is no single historical moment that all of us cherish that could be a starting point for common future outlooks. But the processes that we went through after the dissolution of Yugoslavia and all the wars that we went through, unfortunately, really draw some lessons that we have to take into account while thinking about our future. Vlora said that she had 5 passports explaining the region. If I tell you that I lived in 4 countries and I represented 3 of them, that I thought really could never happen 30 years ago, it simply explains by itself the complexity that we lived, that we are now, and even more the future that we are facing. Well, I think that there is something that we have now in common, and based, I would say, on the lessons learned, and that is European, Euro-Atlantic future of the region. We think in Montenegro that that's the only answer to most of the challenges that we are being faced today, and there are, as I told you, quite a lot of them. Speaking about my own country, Montenegro has managed to become in the meantime, one of the most economically developed countries now in the region. Let's say maybe one would not agree with this, but we consider that we are leader in the processes that are taking place. As a matter of fact, out of 33 chapters that we are negotiating with the European Union, we have opened 30 of them, 2 of them closed. We hope that we will open all of them this year and start process of closing specific chapters. How demanding that process is, let me just remind you, when Croatia started negotiations in 2005, I was ambassador in New York, and a colleague of mine from Croatia was just appointed as a chief negotiator, and he went to Croatia, and then he told me that, those guys in Brussels invented some benchmarks for us. And that was really the first time that the European Commission, European Union asked the Croatians to put some benchmarks in certain chapters. So they started. Several years after that, when we opened negotiations with the European Union, if I tell you that we have Montenegro in only 2 chapters, 22 and 23, that generally dealing with the rule of law, that we have 83 interim chapters, not opening nor closing ones, interim chapters that we need to fulfill to go towards the process of closing. Those most important ones, I would say, that simply shows how complicated and how demanding that process is. I was national coordinator for NATO for 3 years, and we went through similar process of reforms, adopting standards, and I can really tell you that that was not an easy task. That was at all an easy task. But where there is a will, there is a way, and you must have really clear and strong leadership to go towards that. So in the meantime, we have succeeded, becoming last year member of NATO. Let me just tell you that yesterday we had excellent meeting at the level of Minister of Defense. My Minister Bošković met Secretary of Defense Mattis as the first one of that kind in our capacity as new member of NATO. Our next and parallel goal is European Union integration, which is, as I said, really more demanding, because there are so many things that we need to go through, and some of them are really painful. It goes together with all the countries in the region, regardless of the level of negotiations where they are now. So the challenges facing every single country have been, I would say, thoroughly described in the strategy for Western Balkans published a month ago. We had recently a visit of Mr. Juncker. He visited the whole region, and there was a meeting today in in Bulgaria, in Sofia, that I will try to finish my statement with that. So we are, okay, let me put that way. I'm not going to talk about my own thoughts and understanding of the strategy, because I would be rather critical with regard to some aspects. But in general terms, we are encouraged by the recent published EU strategy, though we believe that the will from the side of the European Union to cherish individual result is something that we need to take care of. Every country, in our view, needs to be judged by its own merits. I mean, we show that is a system that works throughout negotiations of Montenegro with regard to NATO. We were the only country now admitted to NATO. The only one before us was Spain. It happened, you know when. So, although we could have really different thoughts about the time framework and 2025, but you know, when Juncker a couple of years ago said that no one would be admitted to European Union by 2019, that provoked so many reactions in the region. You know, saying that, you know, you don't need really to say that way, because we need to have perspective from political point of view, psychological, whatever. And now the other way around, they said, okay, guys, you might think about 2025. And then the critics would say, why do we really need to put that? We need really to ask the people, to the countries, to go through all the reforms, and when they are ready, then we will think. But I think it is good. It is good to have, okay, no one confirms that, but it is an idea that if we go through all the reforms that we are all going through, we might get there. We strongly, therefore, believe that our membership in NATO has largely contributed to the stability in the region. We have chosen NATO as its security umbrella. Among other things, you know, throughout the recent history, we unfortunately have not been able in the region to formulate, to establish regional security arrangements. So the only way for us was towards NATO and European Union. The challenges that are present there, I really don't want to be repetitive, but our position with regard to Macedonia is that we would like to see them as soon as possible in NATO, and we hope that the negotiations that are taking place regarding the name issue will result in resolving that, thus allowing Macedonia to go further. It is a complicated situation in Bosnia and Herzegovina. We would like to see more institutional changes that would allow Bosnia and Herzegovina to go towards negotiating process both in NATO and European Union. We see new perspective for Serbia and Montenegro as well within the context of European Union integration, and I would share thoughts by Stanislav about the possibility of NATO integration for all the countries in the region. Therefore, my message from this panel is actually an invitation to both European Union and NATO to keep an open eye for them. I don't want really to go into recent past, but you know, once this country was not very much interested in some events when the solution of Yugoslavia started, but when they jumped in to 1995, they were able to at least to stop the war, and in some other cases, it is important to have the United States of America and European Union present there. A synergy of two of them is welcome as well. So. You know, we all know the famous sentence of a wise man. I would really like to see my region, at least for the time of my life, producing history that we can easily consume. And that is the task that we think should be made throughout European and European Union, European and Euro-Atlantic integration process. Finally, let me just share with you a couple of things that I got some information from the capital, that today there was a very important meeting organized by Bulgarian presidency in Sofia. President Borisov hosted a meeting with all the leaders of the Western Balkans, and Mr. Juncker, Commissioner Hahn, and Mogherini, and the first impressions were really very, very positive ones. Regarding the future of the region, I forgot to mention one particular aspect, and that is good neighborly relations of the country in the region. We do have quite a lot of problems, as you know. We have some issues with our neighboring countries. Two of them are regard the demarcation and some border issues. I would call that rather issues than problems, and we hope that the first one is going to be resolved very soon with Kosovo. And we did our best, and we did really try to help, even some internal problems to be resolved in the best possible way. So the ideas now are, or accent are on reforms, and we all need to go through additional reforms. As I said, some of them are not really easy to go through. Good neighborly relations, and to try to get closer to each other, building infrastructure in the first place. Stanislav mentioned some of the ideas and forum that we are all participating, and I hope that we will get soon some concrete results. And the main message regarding this important strategy that was published recently, or messages are twofold. First, it shows a kind of, I put it, a clear perspective for Western Balkans, and I crossed that clear and said renewed perspective of the Western Balkans towards European Union. That is really very important. So perspective is there when we know that. And the second one is that European Union has again enlargement policy. I don't want to say high on their own agenda, but again, I would say higher than a couple of years ago. We all know what the problems are with the European Union. Nobody knows how the European Union will look like in 5 years from now, or 10 years from now, or 2025. We hope they are going to be there, strengthened, maybe institutionally changed to a certain extent, but it is important for European Union to be there, and finally to have the whole Western Balkans truly become a part of the whole Europe. Otherwise, I'm afraid we will keep on talking about Balkan security challenges, past lessons, and future outlook. Thank you.
Right, thank you. Incidentally, you mentioned the Bulgarian presidency of the EU, and we had the honor to invite the ambassador to come of Bulgaria to participate. He was looking forward, but today it's also the Independence Day,
Yes.
so he couldn't come.
We all just got
Yeah.
from the reception.
Thank you. Thank you for the chance to speak with you all today. It's an absolute pleasure to be here, to be with my colleague, Professor Yonah Alexander. We've worked together for more than a decade, and it's been an outstanding collaborative effort, I think, mostly on his part because he's got such energy, and I just try to keep up with all the great work that he does, and I hope that our partnership continues for many, decades in the future. My name is Richard Prosen. I come from the State Department. I'm not speaking on behalf of State Department, Western Balkans or Southeastern Europe policy. I think we've heard from the policy experts in the region. I'm going to focus more on transnational threats, particularly terrorism as it affects the region and the wider area. Because I come from the office that handles NATO and OSCE policy, I do work on transnational threats for my office, but very much support the remarks from all my distinguished colleagues, the ambassadors, excellencies, distinguished guest colleagues. It's great to be here today. Let me just focus a bit on terrorism and some of the recent events, mostly to work against the ISIS and its affiliates and the Defeat ISIS campaign. I've come a long way since 2014 when foreign terrorist fighters, or FTFs, were streaming into Iraq and Syria. ISIS was spreading like a pestilence across the region, but the global coalition to defeat ISIS has made extraordinary progress with partners in the region and around the world. ISIS no longer controls any territory in Iraq, and nearly all the territory populated once by ISIS has been liberated. Parallel to these military victories, the civilian sector has also made great strides. In 2014, the UN Security Council adopted UNSCR Security Council Resolution 2178 to address the foreign terrorist fighter threat and challenge. And just last year, 2396, UN Security Council Resolution 2396 in December, requires nations to robustly share information, including biometrics on known or suspected terrorists, and establish inter alia watch list database and share the data between the databases in countries on known or suspected terrorists, and to cooperate internationally and to prevent FTF or foreign terrorist fighter movement. These and other measures have made us all safer, yet as we defeat ISIS on and off the battlefield, the group has adapted and we must adapt too. There's an alarming trend of homegrown violent extremism. ISIS has a prolific use of social media and has expanded its reach, allowing the group to radicalize others to violence and to give advice on how to conduct attacks. Terrorist attacks are being carried out by individuals in small cells inspired by ISIS, but who aren't actually acting on the group's orders. These smaller scale, individually planned attacks often involve soft targets like hotels, tourist resorts, and cultural cities. We've seen this deadly trend in places like Berlin, Jakarta, London, Manchester, Nice, and tragically we saw it last year in New York City. We're working with governments and non-government partners around the world to counter ISIS's influence, terminate cycles of radicalization, and prevent recruitment. ISIS online media has seen significant declines since its height in 2015, with the most dramatic decreases occurring over the last 5 months. The loss of territory and voluntary efforts from the private sector, like those of Twitter, Facebook, Google, and Telegram, have degraded ISIS's military capabilities. Although we've seen global Al-Qaeda also being resilient, and we have to be aware of the Al-Qaeda threat as well. Let me move on a bit now to address new threats and challenges and how we as the U.S. government and our partners around the world are confronting the challenge of ISIS, its affiliates, and Al-Qaeda. First, we need to work with our partners to enhance border security. That's what UN Security Council Resolution 2396 is all about. We're helping countries partner with us. We've have information sharing agreements with 60 countries and international partners, and we're constantly uploading data to the Interpol databases, and strengthening our shared resources empowers global law enforcement authorities to identify and disrupt FTF flows and transit networks. Second, we need to continue strengthening our criminal laws related to terrorism and increase the capacity of law enforcement authorities to investigate and prosecute violations of criminal laws and legislation related to terrorism. We see positive examples from the region we're talking about today, the Western Balkans. The U.S. government has increased its cooperation with partners in the region, and in the past few years, 131 people, in fact, have been convicted under newly passed FTF legislation for Southeast Europe, and now there's 33 more defendants indicted or on trial, all in Kosovo. Third, we must address family members and FTFs who are returning home to provide them ways to integrate with their society, rehabilitate with their society, and support, as was mentioned earlier. Fourth, we need to make greater strides in amplifying the voices of our networks and local partners. We understand that those who come from and are closest to the conflict are the most credible voices to counter terrorist propaganda. Finally, we need to confront homegrown violent extremism. The U.S. launched in November of 2017 an initiative to analyze the common traits among attackers to help develop useful policies and programs. We're in that program. It's a joint initiative between the United States and the Kingdom of Morocco that was launched under the auspices of the GCTF, or the Global Counterterrorism Forum. Let me now turn to an issue where I've been directly involved. I work with a group, as you see from the slide here, the Partnership for Peace Consortium of Defense Academies and Security Studies Institutes. It's a bit of a long name, but basically it's a NATO-affiliated cooperative effort started in 1999. The Combating Terrorism Working Group, of which I'm the co-chair, or one of the two co-chairs, was established in 2012. I've been working with the group for about 10 years, and 4 years ago they asked me to co-chair the CTWG, or the Combating Terrorism Working Group. And in so doing, we've created this concept for capacity building in partnership with our colleagues, known as its TTX. And sorry for my colleagues for the slide behind your heads, but we've developed a concept which is really working level seminars to get to the heart of the problem, where people aren't sitting in the audience listening, but they're actually participating, reading a scenario, going through the scenario, and coming up with solutions that they find based on their expertise, based on their level of what they're working on, bring that together in kind of a whole of society approach and come up with positive solutions. So what is a tabletop exercise? It's there, but basically it's role play of individual countries in different sectors, both track 1 and track 2, getting together to resolve problems related to terrorism and terrorist travel and the radicalization and recruitment of young adults. You see 5 different areas areas that we see of usefulness for a tabletop exercise, but I want to kind of go in next to the general methodology. We call this a 3x3 methodology, 3 different scenarios of terrorism related, 3 different inputs or stages of the development of a plot or a case scenario, and we ask the participants in a tabletop exercise to produce an action plan along the lines of provide us with counter-narrative examples useful for defeating terrorists, come up with policies and programs. If you're in an unlimited resource environment, what would be the recommendations that you would come up based on the case study and the materials presented? So over the last several years, the CTWG, the Combating Terrorism Working Group, has carried out a number of TTXs focusing on real-world FTF challenges and terrorist threats, including homegrown violent extremism. Starting in 2015, we beta tested the first TTX at the Marshall Center, and we've executed now 3 TTXs, tabletop exercises, in the Western Balkans, 1 in Bosnia, 1 in Albania, and most recently, in November of last year, in Macedonia. And our Kosovo friends joined us, and they asked for a tabletop exercise or some engagement with from my group and others as well. So we hope to be visiting Kosovo, Pristina in the near future to engage with them on that. Later this year, we are looking to host a tabletop exercise with our partners in Central Asia. That's our 2018 TTX plans, and we're also working with NATO. So NATO's seen the benefit of these useful interactive tabletop exercises, and we're trying to work with them to develop a methodology that works in the NATO context. When we do TTXs that we've had in the past are kind of whole of society, so track 1 and track 2. NATO would do more of a track 1 with a security focus, but also bringing in international actors like Interpol, Europol, and the EU to engage as well. Let's see. So my key takeaways, but since this is the Western Balkans, I've traveled extensively to the region. I worked for 3 years in Bosnia. I come from a Slovenian heritage. My grandparents were all born in Slovenia, so the region is near and dear to my heart. So in Bosnia, in March of 2016, what was so stunning and remarkable to me was how engaged the next generation of security practitioners are. The youth were so focused. They enjoyed the tabletop exercise because it was a chance for them to get to with leaders who are in the Ministry of Security, the Ministry of Law Enforcement, and the FMUP, all the different law enforcement entities from Bosnia. As we know, it's a complicated country, many different structures. We had 80 or 90 people there, but what was most striking, obviously the prosecutor was quite good and engaged, but the youth were so focused on the issue of countering violent extremism that we devised a project to work with the youth. We call it the CVE, Dramatic Production Contest, so they're developing their own scenarios, they're developing their own training curriculum, and it'll be a chance for peer-to-peer training. So it's the young adults who are in security studies at, say, University of Sarajevo, working with other universities in Bosnia, will develop a play, put on the play or submit their script and have it judged by a panel of experts. In Albania, we had obviously the new National CVE coordinator, Agran Sojati. Sandra Leschi, the security advisor to the Prime Minister, was also there. Just a huge event, very, very successful event. And the takeaway there was they actually took the training materials that we provided them and are doing local level and national level TTXs. So it's a chance for us to have materials translated into local language and for Albanian authorities to carry on the work. In Macedonia, it was quite interesting. They just announced a new CT-CVE National Committee. All those National Committee members were at our event. They thought it was a great time to come together, work on a common challenge. And one of the recommendations coming out of the Macedonia meeting in November was it's nice to have national strategies, and the UN calls for this in all their documentation, where the participants who at this TTX in November were saying we need a regional or Western Balkans CT-CVE strategy. So they're working on that, and we'll support them in the future. So to conclude, in conclusion, the terrorist threat is constantly evolving, and we must remain vigilant against an ever-adapting ISIS, its affiliates, and al-Qaeda on the rebound. We must also update our toolkit to ensure that we have necessary capabilities to confront an increasingly decentralized, self-directed enemy. We have found that promoting, developing, and implementing combating terrorism or counterterrorism TTXs are useful in promoting societal resilience, promoting international security, and developing sustainable collaboration. By harnessing the energies and talents of our societies, and by cooperating across borders, we can and will overcome the threats we collectively face. That concludes my presentation, and I thank you
Very much. Don?
Well, thank you, Yonah. Once again, I'm impressed by Yonah's ability to pull us all together, and I thought this was a particularly informed panel, quite frankly. It was impressive. I will not address the issues, I'm going to be very brief in any case, that had been raised by Mr. Prosen. It does touch on maybe a point that I would like to make, but what I'll return to in a moment. The general, I don't know about what God thinks. I believe in him or her, her. But my impression from all of you, from the ambassadors, on the surface, things are more peaceful than they've been. Everyone believes in cooperation, but beneath the surface are these frozen problems. I'm an outsider and not really going to address them. I spent a great deal of time in Belgrade. I deal quite a lot with, have in the past with Kosovo. I think I'd like to say two things. One goes to the United States, we're Americans. EU and the US, it's very interesting. In almost all programs I've attended here, there's an emphasis on the Euro-Atlantic aspect, a phrase you wouldn't hear in Washington very often. But I think it brings out two things. One, of course, there's the troubled nature of the EU. When I go to Belgrade, usually the pitch in the past was the EU must take us in, our salvation lies in the EU. Because I don't believe that the entire salvation does. But I think the point I want to make about that is that as between the EU and the US, you know, in Washington we are so terribly obsessed with our own affairs. And I don't think we realize how important the United States remains everywhere in the world, quite frankly. Much more important, I think, than we know, for several reasons. One is history. In many ways, it's going to sound very conceited. In many ways, the United States is the creator of the modern world and of the international order as well. And I think many people around the world know that, remember it, and hope for the best. and I hope for the best, but I think we really must not underestimate ourselves, which we tend to do. It's probably a form of neurosis or psychosis, or probably more simply just bad education. But the final point I want to make is slightly different. It's about the nations of the Western Balkans, including Slovenia. Actually, I was born in Vienna. My father was an Austrian soldier and a family of courtiers I come from. And I'm always amused with the Slovenians always refer to themselves as the sunny side of the Balkans. They think of themselves as sort of Austria of the Alps, forgive me. Yeah, that's very important. The sunny side of the Alps. I think they think of themselves almost as sort of southern Austrians, but I'm not sure I wish that on you, by the way. But I think what I'd like to say is this, and one of you said it, I think was the ambassador from Albania. I'm a law professor. I believe in institutions, domestic institutions. The rule of law was mentioned. Speaking now about the domestic rule of law, I think reform is crucial in all countries. Crucial. And it's very little to do with the outside. It's very good for you. That sounds very condescending. It's very good for the people of a country to engage itself in the project of its own country. And I know that there should be maybe more cooperation, but I think the real key is the strengthening of your own institutions. It can be done. One thing has impressed me, I travel a lot to that part of the world, there's a tremendous lot of able people in your countries. And it would be a shame if they spent their time in Vienna, London, or New York and not in your own countries. But I really think that is the key. And if the U.S. can help that, which it should, it's much more. Mattis, by the way, General Mattis, I find quite impressive. In his strategy, he constantly referred to the State Department. The State Department, diplomacy, development come first. That's the framework. The military is a regrettable necessity, a spine. So I think that's where I think if you could really work, and you are doing it, I think it's good for morale, it's good for hopefulness, God will notice, and that would be my last conclusion. Thank you.
I'm going to stand up. Thank you very much, Don, for your remarks. As an academic, you would, I'm sure, agree that our discussion today is not the end of dialogue or scholarship. It's just the beginning. And we could obviously stay here for the rest of the semester to just have an outline of some of the issues. Our time is almost up, but I cannot resist to ask our distinguished panelists for some comment on what we covered today, and maybe most importantly, what did we miss in terms of the security. In other words, we know what we know, but we don't know about the unexpected developments, whether it is from Mother Nature or from man-made. But at least from my perspective, looking at the terrorist threat and following Richard Prosen's presentation, I think I was struck, Richard, to see that in the past 5 years, according to my recollection, there were 179 incidents in Europe involving ISIS, and only 4 of them took place in the Western Balkans. So what's the magic secret here in terms of keeping the ISIS activities out of the Western Balkans? For example, from Albania, I think there was one case, and maybe Kosovo 2 cases, and maybe Macedonia, and so on. So the question is, you probably must doing something right in order to deal with that particular security challenge. Can you share with us some of your secrets?
I mentioned briefly, is it done? I mentioned briefly in my speech that Albania was specifically working on the CVE issues, believing this is one of the strongest threats from outside in the region. We have a strategy on fighting CVE. We have a national coordinator. We have an action plan and a center for CVE at this moment focusing more on people who are returning as a foreign terrorist fighters. Albania had one of the highest numbers 3-4 years ago of people who went as foreign terrorist fighters. We put strict laws inside the country for stopping that, and we worked with people, especially on the rural areas where we saw the people moving to join that kind of ideology and cause, as they called in themselves. We also, so after a year and a half, 2 years, Albania went down to 0 people leaving the country and joining the terrorist groups. So we are more focusing now on the ones that are returning, how they will be accommodated in the society, some of them being followed internal laws, and when they have sometimes they have to face the law, sometimes they have to face the society. The point is to have them involved and find economic ways and options to support their families. And we have worked very close, especially with the religion community. Albania is a case where all the religions are in a very good harmony and working together. So the strongest support from the religion communities in trying to keep the terrorist fighters away is really the Muslim community, because they believe they are the ones who can give more powerful messages to divide what Islam is and what actually the new ideology of terrorism is bringing in.
Right. Would you like to make some comments about Kosovo?
I'll be very brief. Actually, the challenges we face in our part of the world, but also globally today, are borderless, from terrorism to other forms of radicalization, global warming, cyber threats. Those are all borderless challenges, and we can only succeed if we cooperate without borders. Kosovo has established very good cooperation with most of the countries in the region, but also other international law enforcement mechanisms. It's because of this cooperation that Kosovo intelligence actually is to be credited for preventing a major terrorist attack in our neighboring Albania, when Israeli national soccer team came to play with the Albanian soccer team. So it's A, cooperation, and B, or the other way around, law enforcement at home. So internationally, cooperation, domestically, to enforce the laws, the strict laws that we have adopted.
Anyone else? Yeah.
Thank you. EU and NATO in the Balkans are two very important parameters for the security and stability. And I try to explain that. I missed to mention one thing, not deliberately, but on the other side, if I started talking about that, it would take much more time, but it is important, and that is Russian influence in the Balkans, that we, I would say, underestimated, as it has been underestimated, not just in the Balkans, but in many parts of the world. So the more European Union and the more NATO in the Balkans, the less possibilities for alternatives. Alternatives meaning that someone's and Russians in particular, would like to create the possibility for an Eastern alternative to Western integration processes. True that, and when I say EU and NATO, I mean, first of all, as Professor mentioned, reform processes, rule of law, and strengthening institutions. And that is the task that we have to understand, and that is the process that we all need to go through.
Could you?
Uh,
You have a special connection with God, so we
yeah.
listen to you.
No, I'm going to stay on the ground now. I just want to mention that Slovenia has proposed development of the Western Balkan counter-terrorism initiative in the past as a part of the integrative internal security governance concept, which includes other prominent areas in internal security cooperation, prevention of violent extremism and fight against terrorism, fight against serious and organized crimes, and border security. Both initiatives were endorsed by the Council of the European Union, and they were actually grounds for the cooperation on the ground. So it means this cooperation on the ground is going on 3 levels. The first level is police operatives in the region are exchanging the information. Then we have operational level with law enforcement through Police Cooperation Convention for Southeast Europe, and the other one is political strategic level. So I believe that, and there are some other initiatives, but you don't have much time to explain them. I believe that this practical cooperation on the ground is actually the one which is very important, and especially, of course, the cooperation between the intelligence services, which is, I would say, vivid. That's also maybe the main reason why we are not facing so many terrorist attacks, and I hope we are not going to face them also in the future. But also bear in mind that we are relatively small countries, so we are capable of following actually everybody who comes from outside because he's a foreigner or stranger. Even if he is or even if he is a neighbor of us, we would know that he's, having strange behavior, and we will report that to the local authorities. In short, thank you.
Thank you very, very much. Unfortunately, our time is up, not for dialogue, but we cannot simply continue at this point. I would like to really commend the diplomats for your extraordinary contribution to our dialogue. I would like to report to you that we have a special project on the role of diplomacy in combating terrorism, and hopefully maybe your remarks are going to be included in the next report, the international that we're planning to publish very shortly. I will have a copy for each of you in recognition of your contribution today. So thank you very much, and we look forward to further collaboration in this field. Good night. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Excellent remarks.